nation. Answer is sufficient to kill our nation. I'd like to turn it over to Deputy Chief Taylor for a few words.
I'd like to thank everybody for coming. I'd like to thank everybody for coming here today. And basically, I got into this law enforcement when I took my oath of office. In that oath of office, I swore to protect our country and our citizens from all enemies, foreign and domestic. I found that we have a lot of enemies here at home, and we have located many different facets of corruption within the municipalities, the counties, state, and federal government. That's affecting our elections. It's affecting our housing. It's making it so that a single mother cannot take care of her children. It's making it so a father doesn't get to see his children because he's having to work 2 or 3 jobs. It's not okay. It's not acceptable. That's not the American dream. It's time that we have accountability and that we pull this veil back and show this corruption for what it is so that people can have the American dream. Craig.
Hi, I'm Craig Sawyer, founder of Veterans for Child Rescue. We're a nonprofit organization chartered to expose and combat child trafficking in the United States. And we ran a joint sting operation with Millersville Police Department 3 months ago, and we got 1 arrest and 70 warrants on other vile and aggressive child predators there. And immediately there was an outlash, a wild reaction by a reporter there, seemed bent on covering it up and halting the arrests. From my perspective, I'm just a veteran that wants people to stop harming and selling children. And when I see this wild overreaction that seems to be defending and protecting the corruption there, it's very concerning to me. And so when I saw a reporter going after Assistant Chief Taylor and then the Millersville Police Department, and then eventually calling in favors from a state law enforcement agency that came in and seized the evidence, we were interviewing families who are victims of organized crime around Nashville, and they are highly concerned. They're distraught. They're tired of the cover-up. They're screaming for exposure and for justice and legitimacy. They want it desperately. I had no idea until we began exposing this. People were saying, Craig, we've been praying for this exposure for 20 years, some of them. So what I think is happening right now is what's meant to happen. This is meant to be exposed so that it can all be torn down, so that the people can enjoy justice, truth, transparency, and just have a free and safe and legitimate life there. So there's a lot going on in Nashville, and it's meant to be exposed to break the corruption and the stranglehold over who knows how many lives there. All of the child trafficking, the money laundering, whatever all is supposed to come out. Stay tuned, because it's inevitable that it all be exposed. And we're just grateful to be part in a community service of bringing the factual evidence to the people so that we can all bring accountability to those who have betrayed their citizens and abused their authority. And so that's all we want, is the truth. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. We will address the false claims of small town selected official. There's a difference between selected and elected. A corrupt DA, a corrupt judge, and the Scripps Media television reporter providing air cover, if you will, for the installation of an individual who is not qualified to be a candidate. Christina Templet openly lied about whether she met the requirements for holding office and the follow-on self-dealing and money laundering scheme that her and her husband have engaged in since taking office with the assistance of the Sumner County Election Administrator and other key officials, with protection offered by the Sumner County DA. In a desperate attempt to discredit the witness, that would be Deputy Chief Taylor, and hide the truth, the weaponized media has already attacked DC Taylor, calling him a, quote, delusional conspiracy theory promoter. I would like to remind you all that attacking the messenger is a favorite tool of the cancel culture and the media complex behind it. One of the elements of the crime of racketeering is a conspiracy among actors. There are many unindicted co-conspirators who can be witnesses and not suspects. There are three essential questions that we want to answer. Number one, why did Christina Templet seek to be in office and lie to get there? Number two, why did DA Ray Whitley claim there was no sufficient evidence to charge her with election fraud crimes, including felonies, when the black letter law is crystal clear? Why did Judge Joe Thompson block the investigation and threaten law enforcement officials for acting on their duty to investigate when a failure to act is dereliction of duty, also a crime? This case represents a single example of what has become pervasive all across America: individuals placed in powerful roles who use their office for self-dealing and a grift and corruption racket. It is by definition racketeering. Our team identified abnormal, large-scale election campaign funding that was greater than what even billionaires can afford to spend. Imagine what one can do with that sort of money. We had to ask, where was the money coming from and who is benefiting from it? We found massive amounts of money injected into the political system unlawfully. While this may sound like a new story, it has spanned multiple decades. In 1990, Catherine Austin Fitz, working for the HUD, Housing and Urban Development, found real property mortgage fraud, asking the same questions then as we are asking now. In the coming weeks, we will release evidence showing that Millersville is not unique or isolated. Over the course of the next few weeks, we, and by extension, thousands of others, will provide you with evidence that lays out the anatomy of a systemic public corruption. The sophisticated criminal system operates in one way or another in every jurisdiction in this nation, with crimes overlapping into a complex matrix of money laundering and human trafficking. Chief Taylor has been maligned in the media, threatened by corrupt public officials, and even had his home shot up. That's right, 16 rounds to the front of his home. But he has a strong love of his fellow Americans and a deep disdain for corruption. This investigation is all about connecting the dots, and it is not going away. We suggest that if you know something, say something. It is better to be a witness than a suspect. This is about more than Millersville, Tennessee. It touches your backyard. We are asking for Congress to take an interest in this and hold public corruption hearings. In the coming weeks, as I said, more updates will be released, and you can follow us at goefi.org. We'd be happy to answer any questions you might pose. I thought we had them all covered, but go ahead, sir.
Do you think this kind of corruption, there's a pattern also in Las Vegas of it?
The question is, do we think that there's a pattern of this corruption also in Las Vegas? I think we can safely say no community is exempt. None. Because we're looking at every branch of government, legislative, executive, judicial. And we're looking at every level of government, from town council all the way up to Congress. It's going to get really uncomfortable for some people because we already have the receipts. That's right. We already have the receipts. Now, one of the things that I'll find is quite interesting, and I'll let Deputy Chief Taylor speak to this. There's a system called Finchem, where we're actually able to track money laundering. Chief?
I do have direct ties, and we have located direct ties. The team has between Littletown, Millersville of 7,000 and Middle Tennessee directly to Las Vegas. We have different shell companies that we've identified. We try to utilize a system called Finchem, which is a financial databases. And it's awfully strange that when we started trying to follow the money through Finchem, my agency was immediately cut off from being able to utilize it. And that's when a investigation was brought on my agency and myself, and search warrants were issued for my residence and our police department. And all of the evidence regarding these cases was seized by the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation and this district attorney. And one of the judges that signed the search warrant is one of the ones that Honorable Finchem here has mentioned. We find that a very strange coincidence at this point in time. This entire operation affects every person. And the reason it affects every person is because of the prices we're having to pay for housing, energy, food. They're trying to say that there's a housing shortage, all of these different things. It affects each of us in many, many different ways. And it is a multifaceted attack on the American dream. And again, you'll always hear me say, that's not okay. This country was built so people could prosper, to have freedom. That freedom is being removed from them. We are supposed to be judged by the content of our character and what we can bring to the table. And this corruption is keeping us from doing that. They're taking our kids and trafficking them. I work with about 30 different victims' families where their family members have been killed and it's been covered up. Trafficking of children, people missing. Tennessee has become a nexus point in the United States.
Yeah, that breaks my heart because I'm a Southerner. I was just working in Memphis, Tennessee.
Well, thank you for the question, sir. I would add that it wasn't Finchem itself that shut the Millersville Police Department down. In fact, they were rather surprised, as I understand, that that action was taken. That was the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. I would also add that during the execution of the search warrant, contrary to what TBI claims, an individual urinated in Chief Taylor's bathroom, not in the toilet, but in the shower. Then proceeded to track that urine throughout his home, blaming it on his dog. Here's the difference. We have a sample, so that means we have the DNA. So of the agents that were in that home that day, somebody ought to be sweating bullets right now, because we will find out in the fullness of time who you are. Now, I would think it more appropriate for TBI and perhaps the Inspector General of Tennessee to conduct an internal investigation and find out who that disgraceful individual is and dismiss them from public service for unethical behavior. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned that the evidence had been seized. I guess I would presume and hope that you have evidence in other places.
I'll let Chief Taylor answer that question.
Yes, it's not just a proprietary group of people. This is again, This is corruption at the national level. So you have to work it at the national level, which means you have to bring individuals in from other states to assist. So the information is out there still.
Well, and I would also add, think Julian Assange. Do you think Julian just had one copy of everything? I hardly think so. He knew that he was handling plutonium, and quite frankly, what we have uncovered, what Deputy Chief Taylor has uncovered, it is every bit the plutonium that Julian Assange and I guess to invoke another name, Mr. Snowden. I mean, these individuals, whether you like them or don't like them, responded to something that I'm reminded of with John F. Kennedy. This society finds secrecy repugnant. Secret oaths, secret organizations, secret brotherhoods. Now, there's a difference between having secure information for an ongoing criminal enterprise investigation and having secrecy to cover one's crimes. That is a stark difference. And for us, a very bright line of division. I hope that answered your question, ma'am. Yes, sir.
Does the scope of these crimes include transnational syndicates and networks?
I think by definition, the question is, does the scope of these crimes cover a transnational interaction? I think by definition it has to. We are fairly certain with what we've seen so far that money coming in from other countries has infected our system. I'm not ready to name those countries yet, but originally we were looking at the impact of money coming in from drug cartels across the southern border. There are massive amounts of cash that they have to try and launder, meaning they have to be able to get it back into the system. It's ill-gotten gain. They can't put it in a bank account. So they have to have some mechanism in order to liquidate that cash and legitimize it. So imagine, if you will, what I'll call a recipe. You have 5 homes that are all worth about $200,000. And you have a buyer who furnishes cash for those. And you have sellers who are ready, willing, and able to sell those properties. The buyer exchanges the cash, and you have a group of 5 homes for $1 million. Within days, if not hours, the paper, the mortgages that have secured those properties is sold to somebody else, not for $1 million, but for $5 million. And then a few hours later, sold again for $10 million, and so on and so on and so forth, until such time as the money has gotten so big that it's time to liquidate that money into the political system. It's fair to say that we have an indication, a strong indication, that the money that is fueling election campaigns for individuals like Letitia James, Fani Willis, other individuals who have persecuted President Trump, this is where the money's coming from. It's flowing through organizations like Act Blue. We haven't made a complete connection yet, but there are other very large organizations that will be named ultimately when we are ready. This is an investigation, quite frankly, that is private sector racketeering, or private sector racketeering. Let's call it a research project so we don't get in trouble with certain state agencies that like to license investigators. The bottom line is, this is the private sector doing what perhaps journalists ought to be doing, perhaps what law enforcement organizations ought to be doing, but it failed. You know, we used to have a free press in this country. And with every right, there's a responsibility. Think of it in the context of property rights. You can do anything with your home and your property that you want to until it interferes with the quiet enjoyment of your neighbor. Can you pour toxic chemicals into the ground and let it seep into the groundwater? Of course not. You have a responsibility to care for your property in a manner that does not negatively impact your neighbors. All right, now let's put that in the context of the First Amendment. We have a free press for a reason. The Constitution was written to restrain who? The government, not the people. The free press was put there to challenge the king, to have fearless protection, to even be offensive in language to the king. Instead, what we have today is a lapdog for corruption that gives high cover and maligns anybody who steps out of line. And we find that repugnant. Yes, ma'am.
What is the impact on the American people if we don't heed what we are hearing today? And what can we do right now to take action?
So the question is, it's a two-part question. If you
Yes.
would repeat the first part.
Sure. What can we do? So what's the impact if we, the American people, we the people, do not heed this information that's being presented to us today?
It's unsustainable.
We have an unsustainable system that if we continue to allow government officials, and I'm specifically focused on government officials because whether they're elected or appointed, they're the ones that are in seats of power. I'm reminded of Mark Twain's saying, politicians are like diapers. They need to be changed often, and for the same reason, by the way. When we have this level of pervasive corruption, people who are, used to say, on the take, these are individuals who are literally stealing from the public purse because that money comes from somewhere. If it isn't the sale of fentanyl, it's the sale of children. It's the sale of adults from other countries. You know, we hear people talking about, well, we ended slavery back in the 1800s. No, we did not. It just took another form. Individuals who are willing to pay money for another human being to subjugate them into, frankly, criminal acts. So how do we fight back? I think was the second half of your question. We need to have people who are willing to stand beside individuals like Chief Taylor, like Sawman, like the Election Fairness Institute, and not buy the propaganda media complex when they say, oh, well, you're just a conspiracy theory. Interestingly enough, or a conspiracy theory promoter. Interestingly enough, when you have racketeering, you've got to have a collection of individuals engaged in a supportive action to advance that criminal enterprise. What can people do besides come alongside of organizations and individuals like us? Run for school board, run for town council, replace the individuals who are engaged in this kind of behavior. If you're not the candidate, get behind the candidate. Whether it's financing, knocking on doors, whatever that may be, advocating for them. It used to be in this country that we had close contact with the people representing us. They were accountable to you not because you were paying them for their position, but because you knew them. You could shake their hand, look them in the eye, you knew where they lived, you had their phone number, and you could hold them accountable at the very local level. You know, General Flynn talks about often, and I think it's more than just a catchphrase, local action with national impact. I'm pretty sure that nobody in this room has confidence that Congress will change anything. I mean, they just sent another $1 trillion to another country to wage war while we have veterans that are sleeping on the sidewalks in this country. We have law enforcement organizations, the good guys, who are overwhelmed by the level of weaponry coming across the border. They don't have enough individuals to investigate child-involved sex crimes. We are overwhelmed by this level of evil that has become so pervasive in America. So get behind your sheriffs, get behind your law enforcement officials and tell them, look, we got your back. This whole defund the police game that was played by the Marxist left, they were serious. The reason that they, for example, have utter disdain for the Second Amendment is because what do you do to subjugate a people? You make it so that they cannot defend themselves. So those are just a few of the things that could be done in order to fight back this cancer. Yes, sir.
Deputy Chief Taylor, I'd like to know personally, how are you hanging in with all this stuff? The courage that's there is immense. I'd like to know how you're doing.
Prayers. Prayers. Prayer has gotten us through. Our faith is getting us through. The prayers from the public, from everybody, is what's getting us through. I've heard that often you don't get the courage to do something until after it's done. I'm just walking this through right now, and it's based on faith. No more, no less. So it's taking a toll. We've had to sell our home because we've been doxxed, and my home address has been put online again. It's family home. You know, I'm fighting for everybody. I don't care who you are, what job you have, what religion you are. I don't care. I'm fighting for you, and I'm giving this up for you because I have a walk of faith that I'm obligated to do, and I will see it through. It's heavy. It's a heavy lift. But faith and the prayers, they are the strength.
You have a question, ma'am?
Well, you sort of answered it. I was going to ask, is this a partisan issue, or is it more broad than that? And then the second question was going to do with, started talking about election issues, then we were talking about money laundering issues. Can you maybe list some of the different sectors, all the intersections, or how broad is this, so that we can understand the scope of it?
That's an excellent question. The first part of the question was, is this a partisan issue? The last time I checked, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6-year-olds have no idea what politics is all about. It is utterly disgusting to see adults placing children into sex slavery. Just let that sink in for a minute. We have a society that has permitted this to go on for decades. We now have individuals who are stepping forward. And by the way, to go back to your question, you want to do something, say something. If you want to get information to the Election Fairness Institute about a tip you have, you can go to our website, goefi.org, click contact, send us an email. I assure you it will get an answer. It will also likely get a referral to our research team, and perhaps even to law enforcement directly if there's enough information there that meet the elements of a crime. It's through community action that we're going to make a difference. And I assure you, madam, we are making a difference. If we weren't, why would they be attacking Chief Taylor? They are scared to death, because this is what cockroaches do. When you shine the light on them, they scatter. So for those of you who are watching this, who might be a witness or a suspect, it's always better to be a witness than a suspect. The second half of your question, if you would repeat it.
If DC Taylor could answer the second half of that question for us.
Could you repeat it again, please?
All the
We
different
talked
elements.
about election issues, and then we tied it into some money laundering, and then we talked about some mortgage issues. Is that the limit of it, or is there a bigger scope of what's going on? Is there anything that you can speak to in that regard? How many sectors is this affecting?
This
Why is
is-
it in our backyard?
This is affecting everybody. The reason it's affecting everybody is because it crosses the socioeconomic boundaries. It does not matter how much money you make. It doesn't matter what suburb or what city you live in. Doesn't matter about your college education. And the reason none of these things matter is because crime doesn't discriminate. Crime is equal opportunity. And when it comes to the child sex trafficking, the human trafficking, that has gone across every socioeconomic boundary that there is. They are creating basically generational bankruptcy is what we're going to end up looking at with the current system, which again is going to affect every person because the price of things are going to get so high that the mom and dad are going to have to sell the house to be able to help out the kids and the grandkids. Okay, that ends up, it's cause and effect. It's going into the schools with the kids, you know, not having enough to eat at home. I mean, there's so many different areas that this affects that people don't realize that, you know, just think about throwing a rock in the water on a pond that's just like glass. And think about all of those ripples that one rock created. Okay. It's almost infinite until the energy runs out. Well, we're trying to help dissipate that energy by bringing the accountability. And the simple fact of the matter is, until we get to the root of the problem, which is the corruption that goes across the child trafficking, the narcotics trafficking, the election tampering, you know, we're looking at mortgage fraud, money laundering, all of these different things. We have to get to the root of the problem, okay? And that means to fix this tree branch, you can't mend the branch. You have to go down to the root, and that root is going to have an issue. You have to get underground. You have to dig and find out what that root is. And we have to nurture that root to be able to take care of that branch that's high up. So the way that we do that is by uncovering this corruption, number one, because if we don't have a government of the people that's held accountable by the people, the only thing it's going to do is perpetuate everything, and we're going to continue down this path, and we're all just going to be victims. And it doesn't matter what side of the political aisle you're on. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, ma'am.
With how obviously corrupt and guilty our government and Congress is itself of money laundering and covering up sex trafficking, is there a person or a group of people of authority that the public can specifically put pressure on to force them to act on this case?
That's an outstanding question. In fact, let's start with Congress. Okay. There are a few congressmen who have stepped up and have said that they would like to open a public corruption hearing. I don't want to throw a wet blanket on that. It always, one of the things that I'm most fearful of is a congressional hearing, because a lot seems to be said and very little seems to be done. But I think therein lies the power of a congressional hearing. A lot gets said. And when you start outing the individuals who are engaged in these crimes against humanity, here in the United States, I mean, think about this for a moment. It's been estimated that we have 400,000 children missing this year.
Yes.
That is roughly 10 times the population of my hometown, Prescott, Arizona. 10 times. I believe that Congress has an interest in this because it is the future of this nation. It is the cancer of public corruption that is consuming this country. And as it's been said by President Lincoln, this country won't go down because of an external threat. It'll go down because the people have lost their way internally. So, yeah, I think that the vast majority of folks that are out there, and I would also, I'm reminded by the story of Gideon's 300. Gideon started off with 30,000. That got pared down to 3,000. Ultimately, it was 300 who made the difference. So get on the phone, call your congressman, and demand, in a nice way, of course, that they open an investigation into public corruption, campaign finance fraud, and to put meaningful guardrails into position. Here's one example. The use of gift cards to make campaign contributions. They call them cash parties, where wealthy individuals show up with gift cards that they have purchased at one of the local stores and hand them out to individuals who might not ordinarily make a campaign contribution, and then strongly suggest that they make those contributions to a certain individual. That is called bypassing campaign finance restrictions. It is a crime. So when you participate in that, you are essentially disenfranchising your neighbors who might be living by the rules. You know, there's a reason that we write election law. As a policymaker myself, I can speak to this. It's so that we have a fair playing field, or at least the perception of a fair playing field, so that everybody knows the rules going in. Nobody has a thumb on the scale or a special in order to get elected, because at the end of the day, elections are about the consent of the governed. If you interfere with that, it is not the consent of the governed. It's the selection of a very few. I hope that answers your question. Yes, sir.
I believe we have the best Congress money could buy, and that's a problem.
I've heard that said before.
Yeah. Number one, I think we have at this point several platoons of truthful soldiers, podcasters, ready to be deployed on your behalf. We need him. We need a presentation that kicks ass. We are conspiring to kick ass right now. We need a presentation with the presentation that we saw with irrevocable evidence, where we could bring this man around and get him out public, because I think that's the most powerful thing that we could do collectively.
Yes, that's the best answer I can give you. So over the coming weeks, we will indeed be releasing information. There is we're currently working on a narrated explanation of just one small example. And when you broadcast that across 3,143 counties in America, keep in mind, Millersville is population
Between 6,000 and 7,000 people.
This is a tiny example, but the pervasive fraud that is being committed, it's one small example of what is going on in that community. This isn't the only, this is just the one that Chief Taylor bid into because he had evidence.
When do you think we can have such a presentation ready for deployment?
We hope to be able to deploy that within the next 7 to 10 days.
Perfect.
Yes, ma'am.
So you mentioned election interference a few moments ago, and we've heard a lot of information today, and this is probably the tip of the iceberg, I can imagine. So we are days away, weeks away from an election. How important is this? Is this going to compromise the upcoming election? How important is it to get this information out to the people?
It's critically important. Not that it is going to alter the trajectory of what is happening right now. I think that ship probably left the dock a while back, all right? However, as we look forward and try to map how we will, as a nation, as communities, even at the local level, how will we respond to what is disclosed, not just about Millersville, but the connection between Nashville and Scottsdale, Arizona, between around the nation, where they're connected to Scottsdale, Arizona. Those are going to be the. And of course, we don't want to wrongfully accuse anybody of anything, because the media does that. Okay? They wrongfully accuse individuals and they try to create this narrative. We're not creating a narrative here. We act on fact. We do not act on hyperbole. We do not manufacture evidence. You know, one of the things that I find interesting about the search warrants that Chief Taylor spoke of, the DA and the judge were subjects of interest in the very investigation that he was engaged in, where they pulled a search warrant. How convenient, right? Yes, sir.
What does proper justice look like if, with all the evidence and all the knowledge, if it is applied toward justice? How many people are we looking at? Are we looking at fines as punishment, short-term prison sentences, long-term prison sentences, death penalties? In your mind, when you see what you see and know what you know, and your righteous hearts desire justice, what does that justice look like?
You have to take your heart out of it. We are governed by our Constitution. Everybody has due process. That's not up to us. That's up to a jury.
Justice.
That's up to a jury and to a judge. And that's their job to provide the justice. Okay? We are only the finders of fact and present it to them. And we have to believe in them to do the right thing, to get the accountability or the justice on what you're speaking.
I would add that justice is always tempered by emotion. That's why you have juries. As a retired law enforcement officer, I remember back to the very first day of Law Enforcement Academy. My constitutional law professor said, never forget this fact. The U.S. Constitution was written by criminals for criminals. At the time, I thought it was hyperbole. But remember this, when we broke away from the crown, they were treasonous. At the same time, they knew that their countrymen would at some point appreciate the fact that they stood up for civil rights. So in today's context, I think it's important for us to understand that while we may find these heinous crimes, juries have a heart for both victim and perpetrator. They are the balancing, the buffer between harshness and mercy. I don't want to change that system. I think it's a sound system because when you get in front of a jury and you show the jury some of the things that we have seen, that jury will probably lean more towards harsh than they will mercy. But the suspect has to have that opportunity. I think we can agree that we stand by that.
Absolutely. We have a question in the back.
Yes, sir.
So I'm trying to rope this all together. What you're saying is you had a small investigation in Millersville that you were doing that involved a local politician. That investigation showed money coming in from outside of Millersville, from other parts of the country, that as you got deeper, it was larger and larger sums. That somehow Millersville is tied to Scottsdale, Arizona, to Nevada, to other states where money was being funneled into this small town to then help what you thought was just local politicians, but somehow that also became huge sums going out for other criminal activities such as child trafficking or laundered money then going into other campaigns. As soon as you hit somebody's radar at Finchem, that triggered statewide parties or law enforcement to do something to trigger you. They came to your house with the search warrant, looking for anything you had on that local politician, not to do an investigation, but to stop your investigation, which was a lawful investigation. And then let me just add this one little thing. As you looked at that, you uncovered a pattern that you now see because you have the EFI group working with you, where they're seeing the same pattern repeated over and over and over and over in other counties. So he found a cookie cutter thing at a small level that now is actually being seen nationally. Am I saying it the right way?
That's correct. In fact, I'll let Chief Taylor respond to the shutdown of Finchem and what might have motivated that. But I think the thing to remember is that you use the right term, cookie cutter. This has been replicated so many times in so many communities that anybody within earshot of this broadcast, I assure you, you are affected.
How much money are you talking being laundered through your county that you think might be going on in the country? I mean, this is a small town thing, but I remember Tennessee is where Buford Pusser was, and he was in a cauldron that was way, way bigger than just his little county. So, I mean, what kind of money are we talking? A couple million or 10 million? What kind of numbers are we talking?
So that's one of the things that we're still trying to track down. So just in that side of it, when we're talking about mortgages and homes and investment companies, I don't want to get too deep into the grass here, because when we go to provide that, I want to be able to show people the actual physical evidence that we have obtained. And unfortunately, that evidence was taken, the ability to do that was taken from us by the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, with them shutting us down. What we're looking at in totality is what appears to be blanket mortgages in the hundreds of millions, billions, and possibly $1 trillion amount that crisscross the United States in key states, key counties, where they are creating a geopolitical shift by pushing out the generational family.
And you're saying that money's coming from places like these tiny companies that you get online and create, say in Nevada, Arizona, and other states that have that capability, which allows it to then be laundered almost anonymously into
Tell them about the standard.
political campaigns like yours. I'm getting too deep. I know you don't want to go to some of these areas because you're trying to protect your investigation, but is this the pattern that you're seeing? Is that what it's all about?
Yes, sir. We've picked up on this pattern, and we're seeing it again in, I'm going to say, at least 15 different states. And these states are key states. You know, we used to have what we called border states and things like that, where we had the trafficking happening, the narcotics trafficking. Well, a lot of the states now, we have areas like, let's say Louisville, Kentucky. Louisville, Kentucky used to be a very nice area, and now it has changed drastically. Nashville is the same way. It's changed drastically. So what we're finding is these companies are coming in, buying up the residences there so that the generational family can no longer be there. And it's creating this political shift. So we have identified the method. We were trying to track down the evidence to validate everything, to move forward with a criminal investigation, because you have to validate the information, gather the evidence. Unfortunately, we were stopped. And it does tie back to very key source states. Directly into Maricopa County, Arizona is one of the key areas that we are finding it going back. We're finding PO boxes that have 300 to 400 different shell companies that are coming back to a single PO box. And then that comes back to a single physical address.
So is this cartel money? Is it nation state money? Are we talking, I didn't want to say countries, but is it drug money, or is it nation state coming in through the real estate to then launder money out to campaigns or to trafficking or to whatever other?
It's going to be nefarious money coming in from multifaceted things, like narcotics trafficking will be a part of it. Human trafficking will be a part of it. Anytime you're dealing with that type of bulk cash, you're going to have money that's entering the system through a nefarious means. That's where we have to track it down, identify what the nefarious means is, and then be able to get the warrants or the accountability where we're gonna charge people. Does it appear to be transnational? Absolutely, yes, it does. It appears that there could be, straw man companies in other countries that are being utilized through a very brief look at other countries, it appears that this has already happened elsewhere, and it's now coming back to the United States, similar to what Catherine Austin Fitts had found years ago.
I would add, there's a subtle nuance to your question that I think needs called out, and that is the search warrant for material that the DA, the TBI, and other law enforcement organizations already had access to. There was no need for that material to be seized. At the end of the day, Chief Taylor is not new to this world. If these organizations think that they got the copy, I assure you, they got a copy. This is not the end of it. It's not going away. Now, we do have a time limit on this event. We got time for one more question. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for what you're doing and putting your lives on the line. My question is, what if you live in a state where you can't call your congressman? What if you probably think they are selected and not elected? Where can we call to push this issue?
I recommend you call them anyhow.
Okay,
Get them on the record.
okay.
Record it.
And very good, record it, and then push that recording out.
Okay.
I mean, think about this. We have an incredible number who are pushing out news. In fact, I'm going to give a plug to yournews.com right now. Become a citizen journalist.
Absolutely.
Let's go back to what happens when the roaches get exposed to light. They scatter. In fact, Justice Brandeis talks about the best disinfectant for corruption is sunlight. So bring the light. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time and attention. We are going to have to conclude this.
Thank you.